Hi, everybody. Welcome to another RNR Explains, React Native Radio Explains. This is a new series where we explain how a particular React Native feature works, usually something fairly specific. We read the docs, so you don't have to, but of course you should anyway. I'm Jamon. I'm joined today by Robin and Mazen, the hosts of React Native Radio, and all of us are from Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a consultancy. We do React Native. That's all we do. We're 30 people. We're in the US and Canada. We help companies build React Native apps from start to finish. We jump in later if they've already started to build it and they need to really take it to the end. Feel free to check out our website, infinite.red, if you want to see if maybe we could help you out. Also, we are the hosts of a React Native conference called Chain React. Chain React is the only US React Native focused conference, and it is going to be happening this July. So go get your tickets at chainreactconf.com. And lastly, a real quick announcement. React Native Radio is now on YouTube Music. If you prefer to get your podcasts that way, I use YouTube Music all the time. I didn't realize you could get podcasts on YouTube Music, but it makes sense. So go check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes to React Native Radio on YouTube Music if you want to go subscribe there. Today, we are going to be explaining, RNR Explains, Metro. So Metro is the JavaScript bundler for React Native. And in fact, it was originally called, I think, the React Native Bundler. Robin, why are we doing this episode?
Well, because I've been doing React Native for 7 years, and I didn't know how Metro worked. So I imagine probably a lot of you out there don't either. Because it just works. It runs in the background. It bundles your stuff. It's just there.
Yeah.
But it can really get you stuck if something goes wrong with it and you don't understand the basics or what you're looking at. So we decided to help you out. And ourselves, too.
Well, yeah, there you go. In my position, like, I'm not working this stuff every day. I'm more in leadership. When someone was like, hey, Metro, like, I don't fully understand how it works. I just started thinking to myself, like, I don't either. Like, I need to start from the basics and just go all the way through it. This has been a really cool deep dive. I actually did a workshop. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I want to read something that I was doing some prep for this episode, and I was talking to Evan Bacon from Expo, of course, our friend Evan. And he gave me this really cool thing. I want to read it, and then I want to get your reactions. So this was Evan. Bundling is a really hard problem. The bundler defines nearly all of modern web innovation. For example, Next.js is like 90% bundler magic. The majority of React Native innovation will come from improving the bundler. For example, Expo Router, web, API routes, server components, the React compiler, server actions, bundle splitting, all the way down to Sentry reporting. And Metro is actually fairly challenging to swap out. It's really it's very custom. The Expo implementation is essentially becoming a new bundler that's based on Metro. So bundling changes assumptions about how you write and load code, so it generally bleeds into the runtime. For example, Metro transforms all code with Babel, so library authors ship untranspiled code, making it even harder to swap out bundlers. This is all to say bundling effectively defined Expo Router. Parts of it leak into the larger Expo package. So I want you to react to what he said there. That's an interesting thing.
It speaks a lot to kind of where we've gotten to in React Native, where like you'll see new versions come out, and a lot of the stuff that is new is maybe not as day to day as it used to be, and that really comes down to it being a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And that is Metro. I like how we use the phrase bundler magic, because that's really what it is. Like,
yeah,
the bundler is what allows React Native to be like, run a command, and here's your app. Like, it really is pretty magical. So, yeah, I agree with everything he said.
I like the fact that you also highlighted Robin and said magic, because I was just run a command, it starts up your app, and it does some bundling magic for you when it's time to reload your app. And that's it. And we take that for granted, I guess.
Yeah.
And to also hear Evan say it's extremely challenging to swap out adds a lot more value to it. So as React Native developers, I think we just need to pay more attention to it and understand it more, because it is like the secret sauce almost.
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing a web project, like you ask the question at the beginning, like, oh, what bundler should we use? Like, are we going to use Webpack? Are we going to use Parcel? Like, yeah, like ES Build has a bundler, I think now. Like, it's an option. Whereas if you're building React Native, it's Metro, because they're so intertwined.
Yeah, unlike, like you said, web. There's a lot of options in web. So it's harder, very challenging to swap it out for React Native. So understanding it and giving it love.
There is also Repack, which is like its own thing too from CallStack. It's based on Webpack. It does not use Metro. And it re-implements all of the magic or it tries to re-implement all the magic that Metro uses. But it does have its trade-offs. We're not going to talk about Repack in this episode, but I did want to mention it because, CallStack has done quite a bit of work to try to make that work. But there are some things that they weren't able to achieve that Metro can do. You gain a lot of power, but it's also, it's hard to make Webpack fast, things like that. Metro is actually really fast. So let's talk about what Metro is. I think when most people think about Metro, like they're thinking about the server. They're thinking about the thing that's running in their terminal. On the website, which is, I think, metrobundler.dev, they say that it's 3 things, but I really think of it as 5 things. So the three things they talk about is it's a resolver, a transformer, and a serializer. We'll be going into depth on what those 3 things mean. So don't worry about if you don't understand that, that's fine. All 3 of those things can be swapped out, by the way. You can replace one aspect of it. There's also a CLI, and then there's the development server. So those 2 things also help. And yeah, I know the development server is kind of part of the CLI, but to me, those are the 5 things that you really need to be thinking about.
The development server is really probably what most of us think of when we think of Metro. Like, oh, it's Metro's running over there. Like, oh, look in the Metro logs. Like, that's the development server.
It's what we see at the end of the day.
Right. Now, Rob and Modi and the folks on the Metro team at Meta, if they're watching this, are going to be like, those aren't even the right 5 things that you need to talk about. That's fine. Like, we can talk to, we can maybe have them on later. This is how, the user-facing, the developer-facing stuff is resolver, transformer, serializer, CLI, and dev server. Okay. So talking about that internal workshop I did. So I actually started without React Native at all. Start with just Metro. Install Metro. Start it up. Have a JavaScript file that just has a console log in it and compile it. And then we went in and we looked at the compiled code. And I actually felt that was really, really helpful because we got to see sort of the polyfills that it brings in right away. It brings in a lot of polyfills for things.
I was shocked how much, it'll take a 1-line JavaScript file and the result has all this extra stuff in it. You're like, oh, so that's Metro that's adding all that. Yeah,
it's adding all this stuff. But then as you add stuff, that is static. It doesn't change. So it's a relatively small part of your bundle eventually. But if you just have a 1-liner, it's gonna add a bunch of stuff.
I know in the past, before our stack traces kind of got better, I've clicked on an error or something and pulled up this massive file and been like, what is going on here? I no clue. Now after doing this workshop, I know exactly. Well, maybe not. Well, stack traces have gone better. So, but if it was still like that, I feel like I would understand a little bit better where to look and how they kind of relate to each other. Almost.
That's right.
And spoiler, just scroll to the bottom of the file. You'll figure it out from there.
Stuff is down at the bottom, and then you can, it becomes less relevant
There's
as you go.
a lot of polyfill at the top. Yeah.
That's right. But in this particular episode, we're going to be talking more about how it relates to React Native. It's worth noting that Airbnb, that Airbnb uses Metro, but without React Native. So they actually use it for web bundling because it's so fast and they like how it
really
works.
Funny. That's just the
Full
irony.
circle.
Some irony there, yeah. We're going to talk about configuration briefly, and then we'll talk about configuration in conjunction with each of the concepts when we get to that. But you can configure it, starting out, you can either create like you can just leave it alone and Metro will kind of like have some relatively smart defaults. You can also give it a metro.config.js or a metro.config.json or a metro field in the package JSON, which is usually my favorite. I like to stuff things into the package JSON and
Jamon and I have different opinions about this.
Is that true?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Did I know that before I promoted you to director of engineering?
I don't like using JSON period if I can help it.
I think you did.
My job's in jeopardy now. Oh no.
I'm thinking mine might be. Yeah. So there's different ways to approach that.
It's worth noting that Expo, if you're in an Expo project, they have their own default Metro config that does a lot of stuff behind the scenes that needs
a lot.
That Expo needs to work with Metro. There's a lot. Yeah.
Right. And it's not even just like what Expo needs. It's stuff you should probably do anyway. It makes it better. It makes Metro a lot better.
Right. Exactly.
But you can't just be like, I'm going to Expo-fy my Metro config if you're not using Expo, because there's some stuff that, anyway, yeah, it's not quite that simple. I asked Evan, I was like, hey, can we just have like a better Metro config? And he's like, and that's when he actually gave me that quote that I read earlier. There's also, so there's general options like where's your cache directory, what's the path to the transformer, the root directory, some of the things like that. And we'll talk about the individual things like resolver, transformer, serializer, and the server options as well as we get into this. Let's talk about the resolver. What is the resolver, Robin?
So I have this mental model in my head of the parts of Metro that actually came from me asking ChatGPT to explain like I'm 5 what Metro Bundler is. And ChatGPT used a Lego example. So
like it?
In the Lego metaphor, the resolver is the part that goes and finds all of the Legos from around your house. So like if you're trying to build this Lego thing, so you need to go find all the Legos that you have. So
what that reminds me of, actually? That reminds me of my little brothers, because I have 5 little brothers. Well, they're not so little anymore. Most of them are taller than me. But at the time, they were little because, like I'm 5 years older than the next one down, and then there's 5 of them. But I'd be like trying to sleep in the morning, and they would be rummaging through the Lego box, and it'd just be the loudest possible thing.
Loud.
It's like everybody knows that sound. Exactly. That's the resolver. My brother Blair looking for that one particular thing that he can't find in like 1,000 Legos. Yeah. Anyway.
Right. So in terms of your actual code, the resolver finds all of the code that's necessary for your project, including all of your node modules and packages and the code in your project directory, like the stuff you want to include and the stuff you like, because there's stuff that does not get included in your bundle, like configuration, whatever. And so this is what it's finding, all the different pieces of code that it's going to end up bundling together. Is it an explain like I'm 5 way of saying it?
I like it. I like that explanation. That makes sense. It's building that dependency tree, which it puts numbers like in the actual bundle. When you look at it afterward, you see like, okay, we're talking to React developers here, so I'm going to explain using useEffect. How useEffect has the dependency array at the bottom, like the last option? Yeah. It's doing the same thing for your modules, but it's just giving a number at the bottom. It's like this depends on module 14 and 57 and 98. And then, but right before that is a number, like before that array is a number, and that's the number of this module. So module 14 would start with 14, and then it would have its own dependencies. And module 57 would have its own. Which is how
you end up with circular dependencies. That's
that
exactly.
Can happen.
So like I'm module 15, and then module 15 is also in my dependency array. That's a circular dependency.
That's a problem. Yeah, and the platform specific extensions deserves a call out for sure, because you have the .ios.js, the .android.js, the .web.js, the .native. I don't know exactly. There's a lot of different options. I don't think I've seen that in other bundlers. Like that seems to be unique to Metro, unless I'm missing something obvious.
It also has the iOS asset extensions where you specify the the size, like at 2x, at 3x. It like it figures out which is the correct one for your device and strips out the like 2x or 3x and then serves up the correct version of your asset, which is just insanely cool.
Yeah, it's very practical. So what configuration options do we have?
So this is where you would like specify, you may have encountered this if you have a lot of different kind of assets or images that you're managing in your project, like by default, like JPEG and PNG and stuff are supported. But if you ever had like weird image formats and you had to go into Metro config and add like HEIC or whatever weird extensions, like you probably did this in the resolver section of your Metro config because you're telling it what files to look for.
Yeah, there's also the new experimental symlinks there because, again, we're trying to find files. And if you're trying to find files, that's
right.
Symlinks, that's exactly it. If you're setting up a monorepo, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time in the resolver as well.
Good luck.
Yes.
Best of luck.
All right, Mazen, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is the transformer part of this?
Similar to transformers and how they change from a car to a machine, transformer part of Metro will kind of adapt or change the code based on the environment, JavaScript environment that you're in. So, we talk about JSC or Hermes. There's a lot of code changing. I'm trying to use a different word than transformer. Code change that needs to happen to get it to work in that, right?
How many times can you use the word transform when explaining what a transformer is?
I should pull up my synonym dictionary, right?
Yeah.
But for example, like in Hermes, we can't have class-based syntax. So this is a scenario where Metro will find out that our environment is Hermes, and we need to change our classes to non-class syntax so that it is compatible and Hermes can kind of compute and do what it needs to do to get things going. Another thing, like nice thing about Metro is you can add stuff on top of it. So one thing that people probably have that don't think about much is Babel is essentially hand in hand with Metro, working with Metro. So the transforming happens with Babel, unless you can specify something else if you'd like to.
Yeah.
But Babel, you add your plugin on top and it'll transform it for you, and it works. Again.
Yeah.
Magic.
I actually asked the Metro team why they use Babel to transform, because they could write their own, right? And they've written their own bundler. Why not? And Modi essentially just kind of shrugged and was like, because it works and we take PRs if you have something better. I don't think Babel's going anywhere. It really seems like it's doing the job. I mean, maybe something will come out, especially if maybe there was some like really fast like Babel alternative that used the same, like you could use all the same like Babel plugins and stuff. That'd be cool because there's just such a huge Babel ecosystem. Like so many people have written plugins.
Because I think Babel not only is, we talked Metro React Native. Babel is not necessarily just React Native. I think Babel's also
definitely
found
not. Yeah,
everywhere.
it's all over
in the
place.
JavaScript environment in general.
Yeah.
So
I remember when it came out,
really?
It was like it was called 5 to 6 because it was ES5 to ES6 originally.
Oh, I didn't.
Way back in the
knew of 5 to 6.
early days.
I didn't know that was Babel.
Yeah, that was the original version.
I'm always a little envious when people say they were around like for when stuff came out because
that just means
you
we're
underestimate
old. That's all.
No, because you underestimate like how important it is to have the context of what things were like before and what problem it solved.
Well, a lot of us used like CoffeeScript, and that was transformed. That was compiled.
I remember CoffeeScript.
Yeah, we used. I mean, I was a Rails dev.
Rails loved CoffeeScript,
but
it took me honestly years to really grok what Babel was and what it was doing, because I came into this from being a backend dev, didn't really do JavaScript, and so there's this thing called Babel that every once in a while gives me really incomprehensible errors that like ruin my day. But I didn't really understand what Babel was, why it's there. Yeah. I have to do plugins sometimes.
I just realized I misnamed it. It's actually 6 to 5, and that makes way more sense. You would write 6, and
you write
backwards compile
the modern
5.
stuff.
Yeah,
you write the really modern stuff.
People are
all
screaming at the screen right now, or the podcast, like, it's not 5 to 6. I'm really sorry. I misremembered. It's 6 to 5.
That's really the essence of it, though, right? Is like it lets you write modern, like with modern language. You know how like a language will add some sort of like cool new array method that does something fancy. Like that's a modern feature, but you can't guarantee that your browser or whatever your JavaScript engine is knows how to run that. So you have to transform it to the lowest common denominator, basically.
Metro also has a transformer cache, and talk a little bit about that, Mazen.
I think out of all of this that we're going to talk about, transforming takes the longest time because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of parsing and figuring out what to transform and how to transform. Since it takes the longest time, kind of fun fact, Meta uses their remote cache. So they share it among everyone so that it's already transformed and everyone can kind of essentially use it. So it gives you the ability to have a cache for your transforms just so you're saving time. So which can be helpful, right? We're talking about Meta. We can only imagine how big their app is and why they need this.
They have the ability to have developers whose entire job it is just to work on the Metro remote cache.
Exactly. Yeah. For most of us, most of the listeners, and I think for us, most of the clients, this won't become an issue. But I think as you get into bundle splitting and more advanced stuff like that, where you will need to do this, it's an option. Just know that. And I think last thing is the configurations. There's a bunch of configurations for the transformer, right? You can tell it how to transform the code. So my understanding is right. You can tell it ES6 to 5. See what I did there? There's stuff like Metro Babel Transformer. I think that's the most prevalent known package to do the transforming there. You'd specify dev mode or not here. And then this is how you let it know that it can do inline requires.
Which Expo does not recommend using.
Correct.
No.
Yeah.
Because it can lead to some pretty subtle bugs. It's actually not even just Expo. So Expo doesn't turn it on by default. React Native does, but they kind of regret it. They kind of regret turning that on because it does introduce some subtle bugs. When you do inline requires, there's certain inline requires that can inline and others it can't. Because when you inline require packages with side effects. So as an example of this, like a polyfill, like you import it and it adds something to some sort of support. That can actually introduce subtle bugs because it changes the load order of when things are loaded. Inline requires can really speed up your like initial load and everything.
Use it with caution.
Use it with caution though. Like if you start ending up with some weird behavior,
try turning off inline requires.
Yeah, turn that off.
And then
rebundle and see what happens. Yeah. Once it's been transformed, or once you've done the resolution, you've got the dependency tree, you've got all your Legos, and then you do your transform, which is you're kind of building all of the maybe individual parts that are in the thing you're trying to build.
Right.
Then you have to put it all together into one, and that's what the serializer does. It'll take all of the transform modules and it will put all of those things in one JavaScript file. And it's not just a matter of like concatenating them together like a string concatenation, because otherwise they wouldn't have this be its own module. There's more to this, but you can do some polyfills here as far as what polyfills are included, depending on the target. Like like we said, it may or may not be like Hermes has a different capabilities than like JSC, as well as web. Let's say you were just deploying it to web, then you would maybe have some different options there. And then there's also a configuration option, which is third-party module. You know what that is?
So it's in the docs, and I thought this one was super interesting. It's an option which helps support a Google feature called Just My Code. So when you're running it, you can select this option that's Just My Code when you're debugging, and it will emit anything that is a third-party module. So this just is an option that you set if you're like releasing a package that says, this is a third-party module, so emit this when the user says, I just want my code. But I thought that was interesting. That was part of the serializer.
That is interesting.
I wonder if that's like part of the whole peer dependencies part where it'll strip all that out to slim down your package. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the serializer options.
The serializer, I think, is also at the point where you can do things like tree shaking and whatnot. However, tree shaking is actually very hard in React Native, it's not a super easy thing to do. There are some really cool things potentially coming out by the time this podcast lands that, or maybe probably a little bit after, that will help you kind of identify stuff, dead code basically, things that are being included that shouldn't. Tree shaking is where it would take like functions that don't ever get accessed and just deletes those from your bundle, and that can reduce your bundle size. It's an imprecise art, and there's a lot of nuance to this because the JavaScript semantics don't make this easy. You can refer to things, you can like run methods with a variable string that gets like, you can access the function on the object through a string. That's really hard to statically analyze. Let's also talk about the CLI. When you run like React Native start or Expo start, that's when you're running the CLI. That can do things like build your app, obviously. You can
start the server,
bundle it, or you can run the server. Yeah. And we'll talk about the server in a bit. But there's also another option called get dependencies, get-dependencies. And that will actually list all of the dependencies that would be bundled for a given entry point. So that's really just running the resolver and saying, what is a list of everything that would be pulled into this particular entry point? And what's cool about that is you can debug some issues where maybe like some development files are getting pulled in that you're like, why are development files being pulled in? This shouldn't be there. Maybe there's a spare require somewhere that should go away. Then the development server. So this is what you often think about when you're thinking about Metro. If someone says restart Metro, it's like restart your server, right? What are some options that you can do with the development server?
My personal favorite is passing reset cache basically every time I run the server, which irks
which
Jamon.
Everyone should do, I think. I think it's helpful.
It doesn't hurt.
I think a lot of times the people that do this, it's almost mystical.
Jamon?
It is really not based on anything like real. It's more like if
It's superstitious.
If
it's
like if I tap
if
I tap the outside of the plane as I'm getting into it, it won't ever crash, type of thing. Like that's what it feels
probably
like
not necessary, but you can pass reset cache to the start.
Imagine working at Meta and
server.
resetting their entire cache for everybody across the entire organization.
I don't work at Meta, Jamon. I work at
I know.
Well, this actually reminds me, when we were doing the workshop, Jamon, we ran into an issue where you had to, if you were like making an update to a file kind of like down the tree, we never saw it apply after you ran the build command and then ran the server. And we kind of realized that was because the entry file was not changed. Yeah. So my guess is reset cache, will do something lines where it kind of delete everything and then bring it back. Or similarly, I found this command on their website where you just kind of, it's like rmrf.
Yeah.
Sudo rmrf.
Some random temp directory.
Metro file. Yeah. It killed everything. Oh, my computer was flying after the fact, so it must have deleted a lot of stuff. So resetting your cache can be helpful.
It can be.
I think it's probably...
But I mean, the cache...
I think it's less helpful than it used to be, maybe. Like, I feel like it used to... Like, if I was just having weird issues with, like, packages not being picked up, like, resetting the cache would help. And I feel like it hasn't been... It's not really necessary anymore. I think I remember someone from Meta actually saying, like, it doesn't do anything. Or, like, it doesn't do anything that you think it's doing.
It doesn't do what you
really
think it's doing.
Yeah. You just really need to start
superstitious.
Like kill your server and start it again. You don't need to reset the cache every time.
You always have to put your right sock on first, then your left sock, and then cache. Done.
Mazen, did you have any superstitions when you were playing soccer?
How much time do you have? I still have superstitions now. I played a game yesterday and I went through all my whole...
So you have to go through your routine. It's really more about getting in the mindset. And maybe that's what reset cache is. But you know what?
Mental.
I'll tell you.
Mental.
The cache is what makes Metro fast. Because it's not running Babel on everything, every load. It's just running it on whatever's changed. It also resets, by the way, your file map cache, which is like, where are the files I need to watch? And Watchman comes into that as well. In terms of configuration with the development server, obviously you can like set up a different port. We talked about that in a previous episode.
Right. Yeah. In our dev menu, I was going to say this is a nice callback to the dev menu, where if you're customizing your port all the time, you can set it in your Metro config for the development server to always run on a particular port.
Honorable mentions. RNX Kit has their own versions of, I think, most of the stuff, like Resolver, etc. They have added their own functionality to it. They have, for example, a Metro serializer ES build that supports ES build's level of tree shaking.
It's also in beta, right? It's still early in the process.
This was kind of funny. While we were investigating
I'm already
this,
laughing because I know the story you're about to tell.
Right. We're looking through the docs and I see this like note and it's like, hey, just FYI, there can be this issue if you're trying to use this. Here's what happens, and here's a link to an issue that kind of explains more about it. I was like, this is really cool. Like that they took the time to update their docs with a link to an issue that kind of explains what a common problem would be. Click through to the issue. I was the author of the issue. I created that issue like 2 years ago. I didn't remember it. I didn't remember doing this. Apparently I tried to implement it.
What was even better is that this happened after you said something like, oh man, we should really try this out in Ignite. I don't think I've ever tried this before. And then it turns out you did try it in Ignite 2 years ago.
And I ran into problems. Yeah. and I filed an issue and they put it in the docs.
There you go.
And full circle.
You came out to the exact same issue again. Oh,
you know what? In 2 years, I'm sure I'm going to go back and see that again. Completely haven't forgotten about it.
Set a reminder, 2026.
Every time.
I think the main takeaway of RNX Kit is even don't get too excited about tree shaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's not good yet. It's still working. A lot of limitations. So
really, tree shaking helps the best with things like big icon sets and things like that. So that's really where it can really be beneficial. Expo Bundler, another honorable mention. Well, we did talk about this, but it has a ton of improvements baked in. It is even just out of the box much better than Metro, faster than Metro, just more efficient than Metro. Keep that in mind. Expo brings a lot of improvements that you're not aware of. I mean, Evan's spending like a tremendous amount of his time on the bundler, making the bundler better. And there are some upstream impressive PRs as well to Metro.
Side note, I recently got a chance to try out Expo Router on a pretty big client project, and being able to use Metro as my web bundler, really nice.
Really nice.
It works really well, and it's so much nicer than Webpack. So
it is nicer than Webpack. That's not a hard thing to do. I don't know why we crap all over Webpack.
Low bar.
Sorry, Webpack.
Yeah, it's true. All right. Well, that's all the time we have today. I will say, if you have any topic ideas, this went a lot longer than we expected. Again, we always run into this with these RNR Explains. But if you have something like this that you want us to deep dive, even something that like was specifically mentioned here, I know Robin talked about Babel, just send it to us. You can go to React Native RDIO on Twitter. And you can also email us, rnradio@infinite.red. It goes to all three of us, and we will consider it for a future episode. Really appreciate that. That is it for this episode. Robin, do you have a mom joke?
Oh, they get to see us cringe now, too.
I do.
Ooh.
All right. This joke is courtesy of Carlin Isaacson, who is frequently featured. He's our joke master.
Frequently.
All right. I asked my friend Sam to sing a song about an iPhone, but then Sam sung.
Samsung.
That's a good one.
That is a good one. For those of you who are watching, this is going to be cut out for those of you who listen on the podcast. Thank you all for watching on our very first video podcast. We have never done this before. Excuse any issues, excuse any awkwardness. We're sorry about that. It's just the first time. We're trying to get used to it. Let us know what you think in the YouTube comments below. Hit like, hit subscribe. It's really important that we get some initial kind of energy boost here to help us do this, because it's a little more, we feel a little more on stage here. It's a little more exhausting, but it's also really fun. And so if you find some value out of watching us on YouTube, please do hit those buttons. That's really important. Thank you all for watching.
See you next time.
Bye.